Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Luke chapter 7, and we're going to continue Jesus' journey. Jesus preaching. He's going around preaching, and he's going to come across a very interesting um, um, encounter. Now, one of the things about this is, excuse me, um, out of all of the comments, the commendations on faith, two of one of his greatest commendations about faith is that people had great faith were people who were not Jewish. They were Gentiles. Okay? They were Gentiles. So that's kind of interesting there. Let's get to it. So, Luke chapter 7 verse 1 says, when he had concluded all his sayings, all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum, and the centurion's slave, who was highly valued by him, was sick and about to die. And when the centurions heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, requesting him to come to save his life of his slave. And when they had reached Jesus, they pleaded with him earnestly, saying, he is worthy for you to grant this, because he loves our nation and has built us a synagogue. Now, what is this centurion, who was a Roman, he's a Roman soldier in charge of a group of soldiers, and so the fact that you could call him a proselyte. But he was actually even more than just a proselyte. He was somebody. Notice he said he loves God. He loves our people. He built a synagogue for us. And so, this is again astounding that one, you see the character so far of this man, and I'll say this, he didn't have to. Think about it, he didn't have to have these credentials for Jesus to come and heal him. If you think about the Syrophoenician woman, she didn't have all these. She didn't have all of these kind of the qualifications or accomplishments. But yet she also exhibited faith. And so it says that when he had concluded these sayings, well, I mean, the centurion, but his, and I think his, the qualities that he's exhibiting go more to his faith. So one, notice his slave, and get this, who was highly valued by him, was sick and about to die. So when you think about slavery too, now slavery has always been around since Adam, since sin. Since Adam opened the door and let sin invade the world, slavery has always been around, along with a whole bunch of other sins. Slavery in the transatlantic slave trade was different with this respect. It was the first time in human history where race or racism comes into play. This is where the word racism comes into play. In other words, this is not racism here. But when you look at the textbook definition of racism with the transatlantic slave trade, this was the first time where a single ethnicity was targeted for slavery. And that's what's different than the transatlantic slave trade. This slavery was, you could say, the everyday common kind of slave. So slavery pretty much went like this. If your nation, city, tribe, community was weaker and you got conquered, you were a slave. Now, there are also what you can call indentured slavery, going into slavery because of debt. But pretty much in the Romans world, it was believed up to a third of the population were slaves. So slavery, and as slaves, they had no rights. There was no obligation. You had no obligation to treat them right. If you were a slave, then you were a slave. And Romans had different kinds of ways of you can get out of slaves. In fact, Paul would use this in his letters in terms of adoption, one, and then redemption. The word redemption ties to this kind of slavery, being bought out of slavery, the kind of redemption that buys you completely out of slavery, never again being subject to slavery. Okay, so that's part of the definition of even redemption. How do you make that redemption? Through some kind of payment. So the fact that when he says that this slave was highly valued by him, it's not talking about valued as property. In other words, this slave here makes money for me. That this slave is he's valued because of what he does for me. The man loved his slave. So then he goes to Jesus, and Luke, he requests that the slave, that Jesus would come and heal. He hears Jesus. He hears the stories about Jesus. Now remember, he is a non-Jewish person. Now, even though he's living in the vicinity of Jerusalem, or he's living in the vicinity of Galilee, he hears the story, but see, remember, he's a Jew, so in a sense, he's kind of outside of the community. And a lot of times, too, that the Jewish people were not the most beloved people among the Romans. So you see that, okay, he's thinking about this. His slave is gravely ill, and then he hears about the great man Jesus who performs miracles, that people get healed by this man. It is almost kind of reminds you of the story of Naaman in the Old Testament under Elijah, the prophet. He was a Gentile, and he had leprosy. He had a Israelite, a slave girl. She was a slave. Again, you see the same pattern of slavery. They were conquered. She was, for whatever reason, was his slave. She says, hey, in Israel, there's a prophet that if you go to him, he'll heal you of your leprosy. And her story was so convincing that he travels to where Elijah was, and then he comes out, and then Elijah sends his servant out and said, hey, go bathe 7 times in the River Jordan. So Elijah doesn't even come out. He says, go do that. So Naaman went away he was peeved, because he said, at least this man could have came out and greeted me, and instead he sends his servant out. And then on top of all of that, he tells me to go and bathe in the dirty River Jordan. I mean, there are other great rivers and lakes I could have bathed in. So then his servant, his attendant, said, well, if he had told you to do something great, wouldn't you have done that? Why not just at least go and obey him and do that? So he went and bathed. And not only was he healed of his leprosy, but his skin was so smooth, it was as if it was a baby skin. It kind of reminds me of this story here where the centurion, again, he's going to exhibit even greater faith than Naaman. He's going to exhibit greater faith than in Israel by Jesus' standard. So he says, okay, this man loves our nation. He has built us a synagogue. Okay? So when he says he's worthy, verse 4, he's worthy for you to grant this. Now again, Jesus healing, this is not the criteria in which Jesus based healing on. But they bring this forth. Now verse 6 says, so Jesus went with him, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent to friends to tell him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, since I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. Now remember, his friends said, hey, he's worthy of this. So now the man says, no, I'm not worthy. So now this man exhibits, now watch the elements of faith here. He exhibits humility before Jesus. He's very humble. Now this is a centurion, so he has some clout. He has some rank. He says, I'm not worthy. And notice though his friends said, hey, he's worthy. Look what all of the things that he's done. He says, I'm not even worthy for you to come under my roof. I'm not worthy for you to come. He says, but say the word and my servant will be cured. And then here is the testament of his faith. For I too am a man placed under authority, having soldiers under my command. I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it. Jesus heard this, and he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd, followed him. He said, I tell you, I have not found so great a faith, even in Israel. And when those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. Now, a couple of things about this, that Jesus does not need proximity to perform miracles. He didn't even go to the man's house, and he was healed. But what you could say was a great compliment to the centurion, but an indictment to the children of Israel, is that he said, I have not found so great faith even in Israel. And Jesus was sent to Israel. Okay? And I often say this, that the Jews, as we see here in scriptures, the Jews, unbelief is unbelievable. And so here Jesus, this man who is not an Israelite, Jesus compliments him on his great faith. I said, I'm not seeing this kind of faith in Israel. And you'll see this throughout in the kind of totality of the relationship when Jesus comes to the point where he says, Jerusalem, you missed your chance. The visitation happened and you did not take advantage of it. Your house is left desolate to you. What a compliment. And the idea was that it doesn't mean that this man was some great person. Notice Jesus says his faith was great. Now, why? Because he was able to recognize what he needed to recognize in Jesus. And one, that brought him to humility. He humbled himself before Jesus. And then he says, all you have to do is speak the word. I see this in you. And he's asking in humility. And Jesus granted him. Didn't even go to the house. And the man was healed. All right, verse 11 says, soon after he was on his way to a town called Nain, his disciples and a large crowd were traveling with him. Now, you note the large crowd. I'll bring that up later, but note the large crowd traveling with him. Just as he neared the gate of the town, a dead man was being carried out. He was his mother's only son, and she was a widow. A large crowd from the city was also with her. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her and said, don't cry. Then he came up and touched the open coffin, and the pallbearers stopped. And he said, young man, I tell you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Then fear came over everyone, and they glorified God, saying, a great prophet has risen among us, and God hath visited his people. And this report went throughout Judea in all vicinity. Interesting, this healing, or actually being raised from the dead. And let me just say this, there is a difference being raised from the dead and then the resurrection of the dead. The resurrection of the dead is eternal. It is bodily rising, but also changing. So the resurrection of the dead is when the believers, okay, their body will be raised and it will be eternally changed, glorified. Now, also, the resurrection of the unbelievers is their bodies will be united, but not glorified, but fitted for their eternal damnation. All right, so that's the resurrection that's yet to come. Jesus was the first to be resurrected, and then those at his coming, meaning what we call the rapture. Now, this is being here is not a resurrection; it is being raised from the dead. He simply life came back, the spirits came back. Whatever healing that was needed happened to bring them back from there. So if they died from a sickness, then they would heal from the sickness, and then they were brought back to life. But then, because there was no change, they all faced death again. So they were just healed. They were just brought back to life, and they were just healed. And so, but with this, only Jesus could have done this. Elijah did it. He healed. He raised someone from the dead, a son. So you can only do this by the power of God. Okay, so God's mercy. And also, too, we're talking about being raised from the dead. So life and death is based upon your spirit being in your body. So at the time of death, and what makes you truly dead, is your spirit leaves your body. And so however that comes out, so for example, when you come to the point of death, you come to the end of your life, and that comes from a lot of ways. That your body ceased to function. But one of the reasons why it ceased to function because your spirit leaves the body. Now, how that comes together, I can't tell you. So, for example, if when you're shot and your body is damaged to the point, again, I don't know how that happens. Your spirit leaves your body. So at this point, the boy's spirit had left. He's dead. His body is lifeless. He's not just, you know, he was beyond resuscitation. And there comes a point where no matter what you do, you cannot resuscitate a person. And even sometimes, if you're in a hospital sometimes and you're waiting for loved ones, your doctors will keep you on machines, and And at that point, you're all they're doing is the machine is just beating your heart and breathing for you, but your spirit is gone. There's no chance of resuscitation. In other words, there's no chance that life can restart unless God grants that. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.